My name is Margaret Lawson. I am 70 years old and I live in San Antonio, Texas. For most of my life, I believed that being useful was the same thing as being valued. I believed that if I stayed dependable, quiet, and steady, my place in my family would never be questioned. I learned how wrong that was the night my son invited me to a celebration that was never meant for me. The invitation arrived a week before the event. A family anniversary dinner hosted by my son Daniel and his wife Rebecca at their new home on the north side of the city. Rebecca sounded excited on the phone. She talked about the guest list, the caterers, the music. She never once asked if I was comfortable driving at night, or whether I had plans of my own. I told myself that was normal. I told myself not to read too much into it. Their house was large and carefully styled, the kind of place that looks finished before anyone truly lives in it. When I arrived, the driveway was already full. Guests were laughing on the patio. Music drifted through open doors. Rebecca greeted me quickly, barely pausing in her instructions to others. She took my purse and said, "We are a little behind. Could you help for a minute while we catch up?" It was said kindly, efficiently, like an assumption. I followed her into the kitchen, where trays were lined up and lists were taped to the cabinets. She pointed to a counter. "Glasses need filling. Napkins need folding. You know how these things go." I nodded. I always nodded. As the evening went on, more guests arrived, friends of theirs, business contacts, people who had never met me. I watched Rebecca introduce everyone else with warm enthusiasm. "This is my colleague. This is our neighbor. This is Daniel's mentor." When someone asked who I was, she smiled and said, "Oh, she is helping us tonight." Daniel passed through the room once, phone in hand, distracted. He kissed my cheek and said, "Thanks for being flexible, Mom. We will talk later." Later never came. I glanced into the dining room and saw the long table set beautifully. Candles, crystal, place cards written in careful script. I counted the chairs without meaning to. There were 8. I counted the guests again. 8 names, none of them mine. Something tightened in my chest. Not pain exactly, more like recognition. I stood there holding a stack of folded napkins, listening to laughter from the other room, realizing that no one had made a mistake. No chair had been forgotten, no place card misplaced. This was planned. And for the first time in years, I understood that I had not been invited as family. I had been invited because I was convenient. That was the moment the evening began to change. I stayed in the kitchen longer than I needed to, not because there was still work to do, but because I wanted to understand exactly how far things had already shifted without me noticing. Every request that came my way was wrapped in politeness, yet none of it sounded like a choice. Refill the drinks. Clear the empty plates. Let the caterer know we are ready. I moved quietly, efficiently, the way I had learned to do decades earlier, when keeping things running mattered more than being seen. Eventually, Rebecca stepped into the kitchen again and smiled at me in a way that felt rehearsed. "We are about to sit down," she said. "Can you bring out the serving platters first? It will look better if everything is already on the table." I carried the dishes into the dining room and felt the conversation soften as people noticed me. Not with interest, with relief. as if my presence confirmed that someone else was handling the details, so they did not have to. I set the platters down and looked again at the table. Still no chair. Rebecca noticed my pause and laughed lightly. "Oh, don't worry about sitting," she said. "We just need you for a bit longer." She turned to the guests and added, "Margaret keeps everything running. We would be lost without her." A few people smiled. Someone chuckled as if that were a compliment. Daniel was already seated. He did not look up when she said my name. His plate was full. His glass had been poured. He was comfortable. That was when something inside me finally stopped negotiating. I reached into my pocket and felt the small object I had been carrying all evening. A thin silver bracelet Daniel had given me years ago, back when he still believed effort meant something. I slipped it off slowly and walked to the table. I placed it in front of him. The sound it made was barely audible, but the room changed immediately. Conversations paused. Someone lowered their glass. Daniel looked down at the bracelet, confused, then up at me. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice tight. I met his eyes, calm, steady. "You just showed me exactly where I stand," I said. Rebecca laughed nervously. "Margaret, please, you're misunderstanding. This is just how things worked out tonight." "Is it?" I asked quietly. No one answered. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I did not explain myself. I simply removed my hands from the table and took a step back. "I will be leaving now," I said. "Enjoy your evening." There was a moment when someone could have stopped me, asked me to sit, moved a chair, said my name like it mattered. No one did. I walked out of that dining room while the candles kept burning and the food grew cold. I stepped into the night air of San Antonio, feeling something unfamiliar settle over me. Not sadness, clarity. They thought the moment had passed. They had no idea it had only just begun. I did not go home. I drove past my street without slowing down, as if my body already knew that the version of life waiting there no longer fit. The city lights thinned as I headed toward the highway, the radio off, the silence loud enough to hear my own thoughts clearly, for the first time in months. I pulled into a small motel just outside the city limits. Nothing charming, nothing memorable. A place that existed to be forgotten. I paid for the room and carried my overnight bag inside, setting it on the bed without unpacking. The air smelled faintly of cleaner and warm dust. I sat down and finally let the evening replay without interruption. The kitchen requests, the missing chair, Daniel's eyes sliding away from mine, Rebecca's smile when she said, "I kept everything running." It was not one moment. It never was. It was a pattern. I took out my phone, not to call anyone, but to check something I had ignored for too long. My email, my financial notifications, the routine messages that had arrived like clockwork for years. They were not all there. I searched carefully. Monthly summaries missing. Account alerts gone. A legal notice I remembered seeing once and never again. I found one message buried weeks back. "Your contact preferences have been updated. If you did not request this change, please contact support." I felt no panic, only focus. Someone had rerouted information away from me. Not money, not yet, just visibility. The first step in making someone irrelevant is making sure they stop seeing what matters. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The ceiling fan hummed unevenly, a small mechanical sound that grounded me. The pieces slid together with uncomfortable precision. The sudden paperwork I had been asked to sign without explanation. The meetings I was no longer invited to. The way Daniel always said he would explain later. The way later never came. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Rebecca. "Are you staying somewhere tonight, or should we expect you back in the morning?" No apology, no concern, just logistics. I turned the phone face down. This was not about hurt feelings. This was about positioning. They were preparing for a future where I was managed, not consulted, where my independence was an inconvenience to be softened and redirected. I sat up and opened my notebook, the one I had used my entire career to track what others overlooked. I wrote down dates, requests, changes, conversations that had felt slightly off at the time, but now carried weight. By the time I closed the notebook, I understood something clearly. The dinner was not a mistake. The disrespect was not accidental. And whatever came next would not be gentle. I did not cry that night. I did not feel sorry for myself. I felt alert. And that was far more dangerous than anger. People who meet me now often assume my life was simple, that I was a supportive wife, a careful mother, someone who stayed on the sidelines while others made the important decisions. I let them believe that for years because it made things easier. What they never saw was the machinery underneath, the structure, the work that held everything upright. I grew up on the south side of San Antonio, in a family that counted every dollar twice before it was spent. My father worked rotating shifts at a distribution yard. My mother cleaned offices after hours. When I was young, I learned that survival depended on systems. If one piece failed, everything else collapsed. That lesson stayed with me. I started my career at the bottom of a regional logistics cooperative, filing, scheduling, solving problems no one else wanted because they were tedious and invisible. I watched how goods moved, how delays happened, how money leaked through poor planning. Over time, I became the person they called when routes failed or contracts stalled. I did not lead meetings. I fixed outcomes. That skill built my reputation. When my husband and I married, his ideas were bold but untested. Banks listened to me, not because I was loud, but because my numbers were clean and my forecasts held up. I structured operational plans. I negotiated terms. I signed guarantees when risk was unavoidable. Slowly, quietly, I became the backbone of everything we owned. Daniel grew up watching stability, not struggle. College tuition paid on time, reliable cars, a home that never felt uncertain. He saw results without seeing the scaffolding beneath them. I thought that was protection. I thought I was giving him freedom. What I was really doing was hiding the cost. As years passed, my name appeared on documents most people never read closely. Operational authority, contingency clauses, fallback controls designed for emergencies no one expected to happen inside a family. I never used them because I never imagined I would need to. But sitting in that motel room, looking back at the path that had brought me there, I understood something with painful clarity. I had not been pushed aside because I was weak. I had been pushed aside because I was quiet. and quiet strength is easy to mistake for absence. They believed I was replaceable because I had made everything look effortless. That night, for the first time, I allowed myself to see my life without minimizing it. I had built systems that endured. I had created stability that others depended on without understanding. I had earned authority I had never exercised, and now that authority mattered. Because once you understand what you actually built, you stop asking for permission to protect it. I returned to the house 2 days later, early in the afternoon. I told myself it was only to collect a few personal items, papers, photos, things that mattered enough that I did not want them boxed by someone else and handed back to me later with polite efficiency. Daniel and Rebecca were both supposed to be out. The house was quiet when I let myself in. Too quiet. I moved slowly, my footsteps careful on the tile floor. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, as if the house had been scrubbed clean of more than dust. I had just reached the hallway near Daniel's office when I heard Rebecca's voice. She was on the phone. Her tone was not the one she used with guests or family. It was low and precise, stripped of warmth. The door to the office was slightly open. I stopped without thinking. "No," she said. "She doesn't realize how much control she still has. That's the problem. We need to move before she starts asking questions." There was a pause. Rebecca listened, then continued. "The plan is simple. We frame it as concern. Her age, stress, the fact that she walked out of the dinner. That will help. People will believe she's overwhelmed." My hand tightened around my keys. "Once she agrees to assisted living," Rebecca went on, "the paperwork becomes easier. We consolidate everything. Accounts, authority. She won't understand the details if Daniel explains it. She trusts him." Another pause. "Yes, Daniel knows. He's uncomfortable, but he understands this is necessary. We can't keep running things with her name everywhere. It complicates everything." I felt something go cold behind my ribs. Rebecca laughed softly, the sound sharp in the quiet hallway. "She's been useful," she said, "but usefulness isn't the same as control. And we need control now." I stepped back before the floor could betray me. Slowly, silently. Every instinct told me not to confront her. Not yet. Emotion would only expose me. Information was what mattered. They were not worried about me. They were worried about what I owned. The dinner, the missing chair, the way I had been positioned as help instead of family. It had all been preparation. A soft push toward a narrative where I was fragile, confused, and ready to be managed. I sat in my car afterward, the engine off, the house looming in front of me like a stage set. Daniel knew. That was the part that hurt most, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed what I had already sensed. Silence was his choice. I did not cry. I did not shake. I wrote everything down while it was still fresh. Dates, words, the exact phrasing Rebecca had used. I understood now that timing mattered, that memory alone was not enough. Precision was protection. They believed I was alone. They believed I would be grateful for whatever solution they offered. They believed I would not push back. They were wrong. And from that moment on, every move I made would be deliberate. I did not sleep much that night, not because I was afraid, but because my mind had already moved past emotion and into structure. Once you understand the shape of a problem, the solution becomes a matter of sequence. I had spent my entire career fixing systems that failed quietly before they collapsed loudly. This was no different. There was one person I trusted to help me do this correctly. His name was Thomas Keller. Thomas had been a legal advisor for the logistics cooperative years earlier, back when no one thought it would survive its first 5 years. He was careful, methodical, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. Years ago, when a regulatory change nearly shut us down, I had been the one who found the workaround that saved dozens of jobs. Thomas never forgot that. When I called his office, he answered himself. "Margaret," he said after a brief pause, "I was wondering when I might hear from you." I met him the next morning. I told him everything. The dinner, the missing chair, the redirected emails, the conversation I was never meant to hear. I did not exaggerate. I did not dramatize. I laid out facts the way I always had, clean and chronological. Thomas listened without interruption. When I finished, he closed his notebook and looked at me steadily. "They are not planning to take care of you," he said. "They are planning to neutralize you." That word settled heavily, but it fit. "What do you want to happen?" he asked. I did not hesitate. "I want everything I built protected. I want no one able to move a single piece without my consent. And I want it done quietly." He nodded once. By the end of that day, the shift had begun. We established a new legal structure that placed my assets into a protected trust. Ownership did not change publicly, but control did. Notification channels were restored to me alone. Access permissions were tightened. Authority was clarified in language that could not be misunderstood or undone by pressure or persuasion. We moved carefully. No announcements, no confrontations, nothing that would alert Daniel or Rebecca that the ground beneath them was already moving. There was one more step. Over the years, I had kept records, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. Emails, signed requests, voicemails asking me to approve things quickly, messages framed as urgent that bypassed explanation. Thomas reviewed them all. "You have more than enough," he said quietly. "If they push this further, you can stop it immediately." I did not want revenge. I did not want humiliation. I wanted autonomy. Before I left, Thomas slid one final document across the desk. A separate trust, fully funded, designated for my granddaughter's education. No parental access, no leverage, no conditions. "This stays untouched," he said, "no matter what happens between adults." I signed without hesitation. When I walked out of his office into the San Antonio sunlight, the city looked exactly the same. Traffic moved, people hurried past. Life continued unaware. But something fundamental had changed. My family still believed they were managing the situation. They had no idea that I had already stepped out of the role they assigned me. And once you reclaim control quietly, the reveal becomes inevitable. The first sign that something had changed came in the form of panic. Daniel called 3 times in one afternoon. I did not answer. Rebecca followed with a message that was polite on the surface, but sharp underneath. "There seems to be a problem with the accounts. Our advisor says permissions were changed. Do you know anything about this?" I waited until Thomas told me it was time. We met at his office 2 days later. Daniel arrived early, pacing the hallway with his phone pressed to his ear. Rebecca walked in moments later, composed but tense, her confidence held together by effort. They both looked relieved when they saw me, as if my presence meant things could still be explained away. They were wrong. We sat at the table. Thomas opened a folder and began speaking calmly, outlining the changes that had already taken effect. Asset control restructured, authority reassigned, access restricted. Everything legal, everything documented. Rebecca leaned forward. "This has to be a misunderstanding. You can't just change things like that." Thomas looked at her evenly. "Mrs. Lawson can." And she did. Daniel turned to me, his voice rising. "Mom, why didn't you talk to us first?" I held his gaze. "I did, for years. You just weren't listening." Thomas slid the documents across the table. The trust structure, the restored notification channels, the clauses that prevented any transfer without my written approval. "The house will be listed within the month," Thomas said. "Proceeds will be handled through the trust. No further changes can be made without Mrs. Lawson's consent." Rebecca's composure cracked. "You planned this. This is retaliation for the dinner." "No," I said quietly. "The dinner was confirmation. This is protection." Daniel stood up abruptly. "You're taking everything from us." I shook my head slowly. "I am taking responsibility for what I built. You confused access with ownership." Silence filled the room. For the first time, Daniel looked uncertain, not about money or logistics, but about himself, about the role he had chosen when it mattered. "I never wanted this to end like this," he said. "Neither did I replied. "But wanting comfort is not the same as doing what's right." Thomas closed the folder. "This meeting is concluded." As they stood to leave, Rebecca did not look at me. Daniel hesitated at the door, as if he might say something that could still fix it. But there were no words left that could undo months of silence and planning. I watched them walk out, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. They had mistaken my patience for permission, and now the structure they depended on no longer belonged to them. 1 year later, my life was quieter in ways I had not known I needed. I lived in a small house near the older part of San Antonio, not far from the Riverwalk, but far enough to feel like my own world. The rooms were modest, the furniture did not match. Every window let in real sunlight, not the kind filtered through heavy drapes meant to impress visitors. For the first time in years, I arranged my days without asking who needed me to fill a gap. I spent my mornings volunteering at a local community center, teaching practical financial planning to older women. Many of them had stories that sounded uncomfortably familiar. Decades of contribution, years of silence. Adult children who assumed control without asking. I never told them what to do. I showed them how to see clearly. That Christmas, I hosted dinner. There were fewer people than before. A neighbor who checked on me during the summer heat, 2 women from the community center, my daughter Emily, who had driven in from Austin with her family. The table was small, but there were enough chairs. Everyone had a place without asking. At one point, my youngest granddaughter looked around the room and said, "Grandma, this feels peaceful." She was right. Later that evening, after the dishes were washed and the house had settled into quiet, my phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I answered. He did not start with excuses. He spoke about the year, about losing access and gaining understanding, about learning what responsibility feels like when no one smooths the path ahead of you. He apologized without defending himself. I listened. I did not promise forgiveness. I did not reopen old wounds. I told him only this: I am willing to have a relationship when respect is part of it, not an afterthought. He accepted that. When the call ended, I stood by the window and looked out at the city lights. San Antonio moved on as it always had, indifferent to personal reckonings. I felt no victory, no bitterness, only steadiness. There are moments when walking away looks like loss to everyone watching. But sometimes, leaving is how you reclaim yourself. I was not punished for being useful. I was taken for granted. The moment I stopped allowing that, everything changed. Family does not give anyone the right to erase you. Love does not require silence. And dignity is not something you negotiate for at the end of your life. It is something you protect while you are still standing. 5 core lessons from this story. 1. Being needed is not the same as being valued. 2. Silence can protect you, but it can also trap you. 3. Planning is not revenge. It is self-respect. 4. Boundaries expose intentions faster than arguments. 5. You deserve a seat at every table you helped build. If this story spoke to you, please like and share this video with someone who may need it. Leave a comment and tell me what lesson you took from this story and which city you are watching from.